Welcome everybody to the second episode of the Philadelphia Portal. It is good to be with you, Sterling. I'm excited for today's episode.
Hey, Jared, how you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
I, yeah, I don't know. A lot of things are going on in the world. So I don't know, just sad, hopeful, especially for everything that's going on in Gaza right now. So, and I'm watching the shows and listening to Abdul Jawad and Lar Shihai and taking it all in. Yeah.
Well, it's always good to be with you. Yeah, that's a very real response, and it's very much after I got off with Abdul Jawad yesterday. He was like, "Are you all right, man?" So yeah, funny people checking on me that I should be checking on them. But yes, so today we have a guest is a friend of both of ours, somebody that folks know really well. If they live in Philadelphia and do anything on the left, anything associated with, Black arts and culture and movement history. And so Chris Rogers is our friend. He's an educator, cultural worker from Chester, PA originally, although a lot of his life has been in Philly, and we could talk about that a little bit. He is a facilitator with what a lot of folks know as the Abolition School, which is, full title is W.E.B. Du Bois Movement School for Abolition and Reconstruction. The second part of that, Reconstruction is always important to their politics, and so we could talk about that a little bit too. He is a co-coordinator of the Friends of the Tanner House, which we will definitely be talking about today. Working on rehabilitating the National Historic Landmark Henry Ossawa Tanner House at the intersection of Black heritage preservation and community cultural organizing, which is a space that Chris has done a lot of his work. We had Chris on Millennials, actually with you, in an audio conversation that we did with How We Stay Free, which is behind me, which is a book that Common Notions Press put out that kind of came out of what people broadly call the George Floyd uprising and all of that. He has previously served as the public programs director for the Paul Robeson House and Museum for 6 years between 2017 and 2023. And that's actually a space I think a lot of people came to know him. It's the space that I came to know him and his work there, and particularly during the pandemic when they were able to do a lot of stuff online as well. I saw even more of it. He's a big fan of local bookstores, but shouts out Hakeem's bookstore as his favorite, as well as veteran Philly DJs. And he's the project manager for the Abolition Journal, which we'll also talk about today. I'm sure it's been kind of newly relaunched because there were previous iterations of it. And it'd be interesting to hear. You're involved in that too, right, Sterling? Be interesting for both of you to talk a little bit about kind of what you're trying to do in terms of the shift of the kind of editorial and, kind of bent of that publication. And also I think grounding it more in Philly, right? Which is, historically it was kind of, an academic journal for people all over the place. This is, as I mentioned, this is our second episode of the Philadelphia Portal. If folks missed it, we did a previous one with Wiley Cunningham on the SEPTA crisis, which is still very much an ongoing thing, which we'll probably do an update about at some point. But today we wanted to welcome Chris to talk about the politics of Black memory within Philadelphia. So Chris, it's good to be with you, man. Welcome to the Philly Portal.
Thank you, brothers. I really appreciate it. Always good. Thinking of I was thinking of the numerous things that were mentioned, and definitely shout out the legacy of the Robeson House. I do need to correct the record though, because I'm from Chester, Pennsylvania, and I spent 25 years of my life there before I moved into the city in Philadelphia in 2013, and I think it's Chester's homecoming weekend. That means I got to go see a lot of Chester people this weekend, meaning they might be watching this. So when you did the Hey, oh, but he's been in Philadelphia very long. I feel like I just need to correct the record that I am very much so a Chester person. And for anybody who's not from Philadelphia or who may be watching this, you come through Philadelphia, you look on the signs for I-95, it's going to say like Philadelphia and Chester, right? And you may never go to Chester because there's not really a reason for you to go if you're not from there. However, it is a very important and special location where a lot of Black life happens. And I'll say this because this is Philadelphia Portal. Dreams and nightmares does not happen without Tone, the beat bully, who's from Chester. So that all that whole music. See, look at this already. But yeah,
Keep going, keep going. Tell your story. I'm sorry.
Because we're here to be Philadelphia specific, and I'm here to say I stand on business about Chester, and we can argue about this on any broad street, Market Street, 52nd Street, 69th Street, wherever you want to go and argue about Chester. I'm down. And our basketball team is better than yours, and we have probably shout out to Derrick Jones Jr. Tyree Evans has some struggles. Jameer Nelson is the GOAT. But
those are legends.
I go hard about Chester.
That's good. Apologies, man. 11 years or 12 years you've been in Philly.
Yes.
But you are very well connected within the city, and I was quite genuine when I say that folks know you.
I appreciate that.
And so yeah. So Sterling, where should we start today?
I was thinking that, my family's from here. I am from outside of Philly as well, more towards the end of the exurbs of the main line. So like we're way out there. I don't want to say I know Limerick. I don't know if people know like Oaks, Limerick, but I was just looking to get just kind of like this feeling of like what is Philadelphia in the landscape of Black historic Philadelphia. I feel like just like laying out what all is here is what I was looking for from Chris. It's just the beginning, kind of like to set the tone. Also, what we're fighting against. I don't know. We're trying to build stuff up, but we're also trying to tear some stuff down. So
that's true.
So, Chris, where would you start us?
That's a good question. So I do think in terms of today, I should note that tomorrow, and I put this link in. I don't know. I'm sure it will be in the description by the time we're done. Is so Friends of the Tanner House, which is the Tanner House work. We are working with Ishmael Jimenez, who's the director. We're not working in a school district capacity. We're doing this as a community grassroots effort, and it's called the Africana Studies Network and Lecture Series, where Friends of the Tanner House is really proud to be a launch partner with this with this sort of growing community initiative. And I think it's important to note this starts tomorrow. It's meant to be quote unquote. It starts as a professional development. One of the things that we found or come to notice is that in this climate, there's been a way of dismantling, challenging, catching up a lot of Black historical initiatives within legal battles. So while we have noticed that the school district in many ways is kind of taking a step back from standing, 10 toes down about the African American history requirement that has been fought for in Philadelphia for decades, going back to the 60s, 1967 student walkout, one of the biggest, at the time, one of the biggest teen-led actions in this country's history. That was here in Philadelphia. So we have an African American history requirement in Philadelphia. And at the same time, there's certainly always a struggle for like, what kind of Black history are we teaching? So Ishmael Jimenez has always been on the front end of ensuring this continuity from the sort of Black struggle happening throughout the streets of Philadelphia, throughout the community-based initiatives, into the classrooms and spaces. So at this time, we're making sure that work continues by starting the Africana Studies Network and Lecture Series, which begins tomorrow. It's open. It's going to be on Zoom. It's virtual. It's open to all educators. You don't even have to be a classroom educator. It's open to community educators. And what we're seeking to do is just continue to hold the space where we are bringing, truthful and liberatory Black history into the public sphere, and finding ways that folks can go about how to share this knowledge, build on primary sources, create different, opportunities and engagement for young people. And it all begins tomorrow. It's a really exciting project, and a way to make sure that this work continues. And in some ways, as Sterling mentioned about building things up, it's also about like reclaiming, this sense of like self-determination, that we don't just have to go to school board meetings and argue for these things. We definitely want the funding support to kind of keep these things going that comes through our taxes and whatnot, but at the same time, we can build up these initiatives and keep them going for our communities. So it's a really exciting job, and I hope people sign up and please learn about it. And this is the first one, and we certainly plan to have more on the way.
Can you just talk about some of the processes that have happened to create some, like, whether it's the Robeson House or the Tanner House? I mean, I feel like people know the words, but like, can you talk about like what goes into them and what they are?
Oh, like the different initiatives that I've been a part of?
Yeah, all of them. Lay it out. Just for people that don't know, they know, okay, we care about Black history, but like, what about it? And what about Philly,
Okay, good. I would say maybe the first big joint that I start organizing with Teacher Action Group Philadelphia, which is a part of the Education for Liberation Network. Folks who may be in education might be familiar with the Free Minds, Free People's Conference, which used to happen biannually. I imagine it might be on its comeback. And through Teacher Action Group Philadelphia, I was part of a collective that helped launch a project called Black Lives Matter at School, which is not affiliated with the Black Lives Matter official foundation, though we have some endorsements, right? But was a way for educators to be able to say, we're in the middle of an incredible mobilization, racial justice mobilization happening across this country. There are so many, so much history in terms of historical struggles that are being recovered and chanted through the mics and named and being passed out in the streets that is not make it into classroom spaces. There is so many of like, how is the interconnections of these struggles? How are they linked? So Black Lives Matter at School was this platform in which we educators, activists come together. We eventually go into National Black Lives Matter at School by creating this whole sort of like massive network, which was about like, how do we translate the vocabulary of resistance, Avery Gordon might say, that's happening within the streets into classroom spaces, right? Because we know the young people in many ways and their families are already in some ways discussing it, but how do we deepen that, right? And how do we bring a sense of validation to these as serious intellectual study and learning, recognizing this, subversive in some way. I eventually get banned from teaching in Iowa somehow. I've never been to Iowa. I don't plan on going, but I'm banned from teaching there because of it. And
I have been to Iowa, and I can just say that you don't want to go to Iowa. So, and sorry for the folks in Iowa who may be listening, but I don't think very many will be.
All right. Ironically, I do want to go to Oregon, Jared. So, but
and you may or may not like that. So,
and that project, was I took on the curriculum chair. So my role for 6-7 years between 2016 until about 2023 was how do we build, and I was born on internet. I was probably the first kid in Chester with DSL. So I was always like going through the internet-based archives, pulling different pieces together and saying like, how do we bring these into more spaces in classrooms? And we really built out this whole curriculum that was tied to like, how do we surface not just the US Black historical struggle, but the global sort of like Pan-African Black liberation struggle into K-12 classrooms. And that project was really, near and dear to my heart. It's still going on. You can follow that, Black Lives Matter at School. You can even see the curriculum sort of index that we've built. That was like my first big project. Connected to that, I was already volunteering at the Paul Robeson House and Museum. And for folks who are maybe unaware with that story, Paul Robeson House and Museum / West Philadelphia Cultural Alliance. It is the house in which Paul Robeson spent the last 10 years of his life. It's officially his sister's house, Marilyn Forsyth. But after Eslanda Robeson, transitioned in 65, he moved in with his sister. He was still in the need of a bit of caretaking and support, but he lived in that house for the last 10 years of his life. Fran Alston, Mama Fran Alston, had already been organizing the West Philadelphia Cultural Alliance beginning in the 80s, particularly after the MOVE bombing on Osage Avenue, May 13th, 1985. That summer, Mama Fran organized, she was a librarian, and Mama Fran organized a West Philadelphia Arts and Healing Festival featuring over like 60-something collaborators, as the story goes. And through that period, she built out this Black-led cultural alliance that was meant to support and amplify a lot of like the cultural initiatives and collectives and institution building that was happening across West Philadelphia. You fast forward, a good 8 years from that, 4951 Walnut Street, the house in which Paul Robeson lives in, is formerly like a squatter house, which is its own interesting history, right? Like after the Robesons move out, it becomes a squatter house. But she eventually is able to get a hold of that house, fund it. It becomes the Paul Robeson House and Museum. And it's funny because a lot of the things that we have there are just printed out images and stories from, the internet and things that we found around the community, but used as an interpretive center for Paul Robeson's legacy. And while I was there, I was happy to say that it was like, I think probably the most popular space of interpreting and reinterpreting Paul Robeson and also Eslanda Robeson's legacy. And people would come through and we got this sort of like checking with everybody, and particularly at a time where the movement worked, right? That Paul Robeson, the artist, must take sides, he must choose to fight for freedom or slavery. Like we're in the midst of doing the work of embodying Paul Robeson and Eslanda Robeson's legacy by continuing that work. And that's where the book How We Stay Free comes out of. So those two, I think, were like the core pieces. What else have I done, Sterling?
And then now, like you say a little bit about the Tanner House, also about Sadie. I feel like these stories aren't said enough. I want to hear them over and over again when I hear you talk about the Tanner family.
Oh yes.
And Sadie, yeah.
Right. So the Tanner family house is its own piece. So we have found out a way to, by the time you get into like the 2020s, I'm already in a space where I have a network and people are seeing the effective work that I'm doing at the Robeson House, and we're starting to get funding and resources. And I hear through North Philly sort of like advocates, a number of them. I'll name them: Jackie Wiggins, Deborah Gary, Karen Warrington, who is an incredible and she's a journalist, but also has an incredible own story too of the community cultural worker as well. And
I love Miss Jackie. I gotta put that on.
Right. Shout out to Miss Jackie. Judith Robinson was part of those conversations. Valerie Russ was the community engagement reporter at the Inquirer. And we came together to say, what can we do to fix, to stabilize and fix up this house? And I think it was like a leap of faith in the beginning to sort of say, is it possible to do this? And through a fit of relationships and connections, we were able to stabilize the property, and that's where we are now. And we're working right now with architects on the vision of what the revitalized house will be, right? And the legacy of the house is really deep, right? Carter G. Woodson, Ray Alexander mentor, Dr. Ray Alexander mentor, who's the daughter of Sadie Tanner, Mazel Alexander, and Raymond Pace Alexander. told us that Carter G. Woodson understood the house, 2908 West Diamond Street, to be the center of Black intellectual life in Philadelphia, because of particularly the history that begins with Reverend Benjamin Tucker Tanner, who was Henry Ossawa Tanner's father. He becomes a bishop of the AME Church. Before that, he helped start a freedman school, one of the first freedman schools in the Navy Yard in DC. He ran the Christian Recorder for the AME Church, which was their newspaper. And it's like one of the longest running African American periodicals in the country. And this was during the time, in particular, when he takes it over, around like 1868. This is like during the time of radical Reconstruction in this country. So not only is he covering the sort of like theology and the growing sort of like work of the church, he's also covering the institution building of the AME Church throughout the U.S. South, right? At a time, with Talani Davis's book that I always sort of like quote and name, The Emancipation Circuit, right? He's featured in that book as one of the people who was helping to sort of like support and architect the building of Black institutions, these Black social institutions, which obviously have a lot of political implications. So that puts him in conversation with like Frederick Douglass, it puts him in conversation with Du Bois, puts him in conversation with Booker T. Washington. So like,
can I say one thing real quick?
Okay.
And you're saving the house within the context of a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. So and we have houses near there, we in our land trust, and I'm just like, nah, you gotta save this house. It's going to be demolished for some condo if you do not do this.
Yeah.
I just want to say too that like Strawberry Mansion, like the architecture there too is incredible, but it's one of those areas for people who don't know of Philadelphia where just a lot of, an inability, right, of people to have the resources to be able to sort of upkeep their homes, which led to like deterioration and so on. And so, which is also a product, of course, of institutional racism and all of that. But yeah, it's a beautiful area, and just to underscore Sterling's point, that's one of the reasons why I'm sure that it is also major threat of gentrification.
Yeah, certainly, for sure. And I think the work that we do and alongside Sterling is right. Like, how do we build up these sorts of like networked infrastructure, if you will, right? Like with intentional values behind them, right? That is about like creating these sort of supportive communities. And I'm gonna finish the Tanner family story because it comes back to what those values are, right? So when Bishop Tanner is leading the newspaper, one of the people, like, there's his first son between Bishop Tanner and his mother, Sarah Elizabeth Miller Tanner. Sarah Elizabeth Miller Tanner, she self-emancipated as a very young person, around like 6 or 7 years old, with the support of her mother from a plantation in Virginia, through the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. So she comes through Philadelphia, ends up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania for a while, then ends up in Pittsburgh. Her and Bishop Tanner meet in Pittsburgh, and they have their first son in Pittsburgh, Henry Ossawa Tanner. And the great thing about Henry Ossawa Tanner is Ossawa, as in Osawatomie, Kansas, and he's born in 1859, where family friend to the Tanners, and someone who the family still has a direct portrait of that circles through the family. John Brown is organizing with his with ministers and his family as well, to end enslavement in this country by any means necessary. They named their first child after that organizing.
October 16th, John Brown raid yesterday.
Yeah, and Harper's Ferry raid happens in October 1859. Henry Ossawa Tanner is born in June of 1859. So just like those sorts of connections and layering of Black history, and in particular in the ways that it's you could just see this as like a man of the cloth, a man of the church, you know what I'm saying, and miss the institution building that's happening, miss the sort of like notes of radical sort of like armed struggle, and like all these notes are in there around how do we create institutions to defend Black life. And there's the study part of it, but there's also the practice part of it. So like you got that history. Henry Ossawa Tanner goes on to become the sort of like what the Smithsonian calls the most distinguished African American painter of the 19th century. His most popular pieces might be the Banjo Lesson and Thankful Poor. He also does a lot of religious work, of course, connected with his father's lineage. And yeah, but his younger sister, Haley, she was recruited by family friend again, Booker T. Washington, to start the nursing school at Tuskegee Institute, becoming the first woman of any race to be licensed as a physician in the state of Alabama. Not only did she start at the school, but she also started a local dispensary that was dedicated to supporting the Black community who otherwise had no access to healthcare, right? And then you go a generation down, right? Her sister, is still living in the house. She's married to, and I can't remember her exact name right now. That's the Banjo Lesson. Very popular image. Might be in your grandma's kitchen. Keep an eye out for it. So Haley's sister, who is Sadie Tanner Mizell Alexander's mother, and I'm sorry I can't remember her name right now, and I don't want to Google it and search it, but she marries Aaron Mizell. Aaron Mizell is the first Black man to graduate from University of Pennsylvania's law school. His brother, Nathan Mizell, is the first Black man to graduate from University of Pennsylvania's medical school. He goes on to start Frederick Douglass Hospital, which is only the second Black-owned and Black-operated hospital in the country. That's the Thankful Poor. We now have this up. This seems like an AI version. That's not the original, but it's okay. And
Sorry.
it's fine. We now have a mural of the Thankful Poor up at 29th and Dolphin with the support of Mural Arts. Yeah, so I'm naming all these different sort of like connections to the Tanner family to say, like, for us, we sort of come down to faith, family, freedom, arts, health, and education. And we see those as core building blocks to building thriving Black communities. And with that is the values that the house seeks to represent and amplify and support. There it is. That's a more closer, depiction. And yeah, so that's the values that we seek to like uplift and amplify and support. But we're not just doing that based on our work. We're doing that by working with the community organizations as they already exist in Strawberry Mansion. A lot of people just like to think and visualize that like in every community there are people working on these issues, and how do we recognize and support them, right? How do we sort of like come to the table and say, well, we have these skills. I got a PhD in education. I can figure out how to do programs. I'm pretty all right at finding funding and doing grant applications and such. So like, how can we use these platforms to kind of build up this sort of network, right? This network of care-based infrastructure within Strawberry Mansion to go about the work of like the future of this neighborhood and a future that, yes, is like, development without displacement. A future that is about, self-determination. Yeah, so
Yeah,
I kind of ran it there, but let me know if
yeah,
I got
but
to the parts.
like yeah, and that's the work that like you're at least from my experience, like you're connected to other organizations that are about building up people's houses, making sure they can go there, make sure there's education that's available. I know even I feel like with the Black History, I feel advocacy stuff that you've been doing. There's stuff around C.D. Alexander scholarship, wasn't there?
Yeah. So
you say a
of
little bit
course,
about
in the whole Trump, thing, there's a scholarship program in particular for it might just be BIPOC. You know how it is, right? They never just say Black, but it was at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and it's a scholarship program. And due to the whatever attack, manipulation thing that Trump is doing, the law school decided to close that program, which is interesting, in the sense that how can I say this? There are one of the things in which I would say exist in sort of like a bridge is these sorts of more like respectable, possibly black bourgeois concerns and strategies,
Truly,
right? And
truly,
usually there's
yes.
a lot of there's a lot of visibility
Yeah.
and things that go along with that.
Yeah.
But I would say the sphere that I exist in is like, how do we expand those calls to action in
Right.
ways that kind of get further into a deepening of a critique of the system
Great.
and not just, access into predominantly white institutions.
Great. Yeah, like a scholarship to go to one of the most evil institutions known to this earth, right? It's like predatory inclusion kind of is like that's not our liberation. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I would say like part of the work that I do or where my work is kind of like now is like, how do we work through these class contradictions within Black struggle to create a more expansive and deeper critique, right? Which allows for the organizing of, for me, alternative people-led institutions that go about sort of like prefiguring the type of community-based strategies and practices that are about doing the work of, reconstruction, if you will, just to kind of go back to Abolition School. Oh, I didn't talk about Abolition School, but I think folks might know Abolition School already. We be doing a lot of stuff.
I can ask a question, I think, that can kind of like give you some space to talk about Abolition School, but also like, do a little bit of historical work, which, I mean, obviously, for folks who don't know, yeah, you're with Abolition School. We've had conversation with you and Gio and a couple of your other comrades. I'm blanking on their names right now. But we're gonna have an Abolition School based episode of this show as well, where we're gonna kind of revisit the question more fully of like a conjunctural analysis of where Philly is now, and also like how Abolition School reads that, and why the radical educational component is kind of like where you all hang your hat right now. But I think one of the things in this topic of, Black memory and Philadelphia would be just you've given us like a good kind of entry point through that discussion of, the Tanner family and everything else. But I think, it's obviously Philadelphia has its own history of enslavement. It is one of the first places where within the colonies that slavery is abolished, right? So it becomes one of the first, big free Black cities. It's also obviously not too far from the Mason-Dixon line, right? So it's like kind of a important part along that journey of people running away, escaping from enslavement in the South. And so that's part of that network also that you're talking about with like the Tanner family and all of that, the Emancipation Circuit. But, and I think for the purpose of this conversation, it might be good to fast forward from that point a little bit to think about kind of the last 50 years, right? And to think about, Black memory of the city in that period. And also with that, like we kind of have to deal with the long conversation about, violence against Black people in the city, racism, as well as what you're talking about kind of the, I guess, Black bourgeois thrust within the city and the working class Black folks, and then also contradictions between, working class white people, right, and Black folks within the city, and the racism that's embedded there, the exclusion from a lot of union organizing, like a lot of that kind of history. And I wonder if you could just kind of start us on a conversation of, obviously, when you focusing on Du Bois, right, who's very important to both Philadelphia, but also to the framework of abolition and Reconstruction you're working with through something like Black Reconstruction in America. Like, how do you think about those kind of class formations and the the history and memory of that for Black folks in Philadelphia. In a, you can set the time period however you like, but what is your thoughts on a kind of question like that?
No, this is really good. I'll do some quick Chester notes before we get into the deep part, right? Because Chester is actually the first settlement in the quote unquote state of Pennsylvania. It is where William Penn, alongside numerous enslaved Africans, where they conveniently left out, landed. And I learned this also the transnational sort of like story, the imperialist story that's happening even there. Was told to me by Patricia Green, Jamaican architect, who has some writing out about this, right? That the colony of Pennsylvania, if you will, begins when William Penn's father is part of the British Army, who in the British Army captures Jamaica from the Spanish, throne. The reward for the father, who is the general of that army, is the land that becomes quote unquote Pennsylvania. So William Penn arrives to Chester, and we actually have a little monument in Chester called the Penn's Landing. You know what I'm saying? If you look up the historical records, we sold the naming rights to Philadelphia in the early 1900s. And I say that to say that.
So you're saying it's just a tourists, like they just made it up, that like the Penn's Landing in Philly is they just bought it.
Yes, right. But William Penn also made it up, right? I guess it's all select, and that's what is funny, because in Chester we'd be like, we the first city, and I'm like, you mean that we're the start of the settler colonial project? And I don't know, we should be going around like taking pride in such things. But I say that to say, like, growing up in like this inside outside thing, right, where I'm in the Philadelphia universe, if you will, but I grew up outside of it. I visited Philadelphia, so it allows me to sort of like, I think, to be able to enter into a more. I don't have an allegiance, technically, in some ways. My allegiance is to Chester, which, as we see from the comments, many people do not respect, which is fine for me, because it gives me a space to sort of like be able to like work and theorize with the city, right? And see the ways in which Black movement across these many different class formations are leading to particular moments of reform, rebellion, riot. Like, where are these sort of like forces and things coming through? And I think that kind of gets us, into this sort of this past 50 years. The book that everyone should read, which is not, it's not the collective history. You always have to add more. Obviously, we could talk to Dr. Muhammad Ahmed. He would color the story much better, but Up South by Matthew Countryman gets you at least in the realm of understanding sort of like Black power and civil rights struggle in Philadelphia. And thinking of the many types of organizing that was happening in that period. And it's interesting, because that's like my dissertation work. My dissertation work at Penn was Black storytelling in West Philadelphia, essentially. And it was me meeting with a number of elders who were telling me through their own stories how they storied themselves. I was not doing no sort of historical fact checking, yada, 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 but how did they story that period and what was on the rise during that period, and the shift, that even like a Malcolm X represents in Philadelphia towards like, what do we even understand Black power to be? So seeing these, projects happen, like Cecil B. Moore, Sterling, right? Like, this is someone that we need to talk about infinitely more than we do. We kind of, in the popular imagination, they reduce him to like, oh, he brought Martin Luther King to town. And it's like, no, that man, he was like one of the leads of the NAACP, right? But the NAACP did not mess with him. Because they would say he's too committed to the gangs, right? But by having that sort of like connection and being able to organize the gangs of North Philadelphia together to be part of these moments of struggle, including Girard College, he's really able. That's a good joke, but okay. I'm sorry, comment caught me. But he's really able to like mobilize a whole new generation of Black leaders onto the mix. And I don't know, Sterling, you know Karen Jordan? Well, shout out to Miss Karen. She might be watching this. Miss Karen is one of the Cecil B. Moore's freedom fighters, you know, and that legacy that he represents of being a bridge, right? And recognizing that the role of like is like, how do we recognize the self-organization of the Black masses and, you know, work with them in terms of their material needs in the moment, but the guidance towards like a larger horizon of struggle. And Cecil B. Moore was like one of the most incredible people to be able to do that. So I think of like his story. Obviously, there's the Black Panther story and the work of, you know, Mumia Abu-Jamal and Reggie Shell and the work of the Black Panther organization in Philadelphia. You got to give a shout out to the the Mantua Civic Association. What comes to Mantua Civic Association, but begins with oh my God, I don't want to mess up his name. I'm seeing a mural. I think Rice, W-R-I-C-E is his last name. Herman, I think is his first name. But this was like a model in the bottom, which is like in the Black Bottom, which is essentially what would be gentrified as quote unquote University City. They organized something that was very similar to the more popular example be like the Woodlawn organization in Chicago. This is a Black gang who has a CDC, right, in the neighborhood, right, who is working on developing housing, that's working on community-based programs, right? This sort of from the bottom up institution building that is happening on the ground, right? There's a whole generation of Black independent schools and Black educators. So like my focus in the historical archive work has been about that sort of like, I got this little book here. Let me see if I can figure out the sentence from Kwame Ture. Oh, as Kwame Ture, true power, as Kwame Ture reminds us, may only come through the general improvised collaborative activities of the organized masses. And to achieve, and this is me now, and to achieve organized masses presupposes that our first work be about getting good at the freeing and mobilizing of Black minds, which demands that we begin with ourselves. This requires that we find the break, a praxis of refusing to serve time to a system that only serves us death. So what are the ways that we've have like Black folks, everyday Black folks, some, you know, and taking out the idea of degrees in education from study, right? Yeah. We're able to come together and build independent or interdependent, if you want to, Black institutions that advance our freedom struggle. Like that has been like majority of my work, and figuring out how to recover those stories, figuring out what sustained those stories, sustain those institutions. And then of course, figuring out how they fell apart. You know? There's a huge story that I'm still trying to figure out about the neo-soul era in Philadelphia.
I do have one pushback and thought on some of these things too, because I am interested in the fact that those people are known. I would say I'm going to draw Herman Rice and Mantua. Like the way that I know the story is that he fought against the crack epidemic and users in that part of town, and it is often thought of as like kind of a negative thing, like you didn't like them, and when I know it's always more complicated than that. That's why I'm so interested in this, like how we like actually can tell our story or something like that, because I know that's not true. I know that's
Yeah.
That's not how it happens. That's like, it's like you're telling people, yo, you can do something better with your life. Like, I'm a harm reductionist. I believe in drug users have rights. But like, I know that person is not like just telling them, nah, you deserve nothing, you deserve to die. It is like, nah, you can do more than just do heroin on the street right here and like steal from your mom. You know, it's like, so I'm just like wondering how we do that, you know, just like the Cecil B. Moore stuff is like, he's not just like that he's like, he actually was in the streets. He's not just a lawyer that like, I don't know. I won't know if I want to, you know, I want to deal with that. I'm just like wondering.
I want to connect to this point because Chris, I remember talking to you about the piece that you wrote about Malcolm X Park, right? Malcolm X Park, which people will know in Philly, which has a related history to the politics that Sterling was just talking about. And, you know, you and I had a discussion about this because I think, and it's a complicated, as Sterling's saying, this is a complicated discussion because when we're talking about the politics of, you know, there's one way to tell this story, which is about sort of this normative story around removing blight and, you know, kicking addicts or homeless people out of spaces, you know, and this kind of thing, right? And there's also a very real politics that you find with the Panthers, with the Young Lords, with many folks, where they're like, we want to replace the drugs with politics. We want to replace the drugs with you thinking about like you feeling better about your life by also becoming a resource within your community in a way that gives your life meaning, that may be one of the things that's leading to your, you know, falling into drug use is a lack of, you know, meaning or alienation or all of that. And I don't want to say that in a dismissive sense, that there aren't a myriad of reasons why people end up using drugs, and to get into some kind of moral or legitimacy based, you know, kind of argument around that. But that this is part of a history and a politics that exists very much within the Black community, and a question around some of these issues.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I put the link into our chat. I don't know if you can, you know, show it.
Yeah,
and
I can add it
anybody
and show
can
it.
access it too. But this was a piece that I've worked on for a couple years, and maybe there's a new revision that may come in the future. It's called Rehearsing Possibility, on 52nd Street, the gathering plot of Malcolm X Park. And it begins like around the time of How We Stay Free, the collection that sort of documented the Black uprising of 2020 in Philadelphia post George Floyd. And this, you know, piece, this story was trying to honor that Malcolm X Park itself was a Black organizing project. That on the city map, it is known as Black Oak Park. But through the work of the Malcolm X Organizing Committee, they fought for it in the early 90s to be renamed as Malcolm X Park. And the story was trying to get deeper into how that happened. And I have to give a shout out to JT Rohn, incredible scholar whose book Dark Agoras about in particular, the concept that I always come back to from him is like the Black queer urbanism of Philadelphia, and thinking through like this politics of disposability that we're even mentioning now. And one of the pieces is I'm working directly, and my elders are connected, and we're part of the Malcolm X Organizing Committee, and talked about the struggle to quote unquote reclaim the park in the midst of the crack the crack era in Philadelphia, in that we needed to sort of change the feeling of the park to represent a a uh a story of like Black self-determination. Now obviously they're not always not all of them, but the organization was made up of a number of Black men, and Malcolm X, as the sort of like shining prince of Black manhood, becomes to symbolize like what is the possibilities of us to organize further. It also, you know, supports that, you know, 52nd Street in that area is now known as Muhammad Ali Way because of the depth of NOI and organizing in that area. and the sort of like just the connection of Islam, right? So the story, the struggle that I had was there's a story underneath the idea of Malcolm X Park becoming Malcolm X Park that suggests that the folks who are in the park were not also black, like the black working class or the quote unquote black underclass, like, and how they were positioned as the folks who needed to be sort of like disposed or moved out of the way in order for this park to be saved, which gets into a lot of things that, you know, Sterling mentioned, right? Of like the way in which, and it's Kathy Cohen writes about this a lot too, in terms of like secondary marginalization, but like the way in which we also in the era of broken windows policing, the quote unquote signs of disorder, and it's being used, right, by politicians in the city as this mode of saying, oh, this neighborhood is on its way out, doesn't deserve investment, and it's, so they're fighting on multiple levels here. And the idea of like, what does it take to transform this park? Yes, we would love for folks to have supportive services, but those things are not like here. So in their decision, it's like, well, we just knew that we needed to get the park going again. And eventually they win that struggle to reclaim the park as Malcolm X Park. But I think about this as it's still a very unfinished thing. Anybody who was at Malcolm X Park, you know, weekly, or, you know, when the streetlights come on, there's still the presence, right, of all these issues that we are constantly, you know, still navigating, right? So it's interesting because it's the idea that we reclaimed the park, and in order to do that, we had to move folks out the way. But those folks are still very much so present. But there's also the perception game, right? So it's a very interesting story, and it's one that's still like Sterling. You were on the front lines of the harm reduction struggle in Philadelphia. You know what I mean? Like this is something, and this is the early '90s that I'm talking about. But our struggle for like harm reduction services, safe injection sites, are very much so still an unfinished community struggle. And I'm talking about this from like an intra Black community struggle. Yeah. And there's another level of the politicians and whatnot. But I'm just saying from like a neighbor to neighbor thing, the idea of like, how do we develop a shared agenda of what's needed, who's deserving of our care and support in this moment, is still an unfinished battle. So I try to acknowledge that, and I appreciate JT Rome for like pushing me on trying to step into that struggle with the piece. But those were the type of things that I like really look towards in the archive, right? Yeah. And it's important too, because I know Sterling, you were like talking about like there's the monuments, the quote unquote monument work, the statue work, right? That is happening of like, oh, who has a statue built of them in the city? But we underappreciate and underscore that Black folks in the city are making new sacred spaces and ritualizing spaces all the time. The Plateau, the Will Smith and Jazzy Jeff, you know, Summertime video, is the championing of Black youth, mostly from West Philadelphia, who came together and reclaimed that space and turned it into the Plat. Like, how do we talk about the ways in which everyday folks who don't have quote unquote titles, who in some ways folks would probably say they don't even have, they're not even literate, quote unquote, right, are creating spaces of community power, right, that have to be contested, right? Whereas
have to be taken seriously. They have to be taken seriously.
Have to be taken seriously. And now, you know, the Plat, there was no permits. No one said, "Oh, we gonna do a party in the park and we need a permit." But you look at it now. I talk to young people now, and it's like, "Oh, well, in order to do this thing at Fairmount Park, we got to apply for a permit." Who told you need a permit? So Michael Irvin, we losing recipes. Like we are in this struggle, right? So that's the kind of work that I'm always interested in, right? Of like, how do we, from our own power, right, and from our own agency, go about building these sorts of institutions on the run, and recognize that we have an infrastructure that connects us. There is something that allows us to like have a sense of relationship, and from those relationships, the type of political possibilities and the type of political horizon that can come into being when we know how to activate it, right? It's a language thing, right?
And
It's knowing
and
when
it,
to play,
yeah,
freeways what we do.
yeah,
Like
yeah. I
at
think I
what
think
point, you know what I mean? And then looking around and seeing like who actually knows the words. You know what I mean? Because then that tells you how long you've been in Philadelphia.
Yeah. And I think there's a little bit of a thing around like people don't understand how things actually happen too. It's like I was just talking to my class yesterday, and we were like, I was saying, you know, the way that people have made art around the city is just through graffitiing. You know, it's like, and the only reason that we have an arts budget now is because of those like great young people that decided to graffiti and make their art or put whatever they wanted on anywhere they wanted, you know. And they've made graffiti pure and made money off of that. But like some of the reasons that we even have an arts budget is because of that. And it didn't happen because somebody was like in a room at a nonprofit saying like, what do we do to like fight for an art? That never happened. And also that never works, or at least in my experience, that stuff doesn't work. So
yeah, well, I got a note something that just came up in the comments from Leah 1170. Talk about the impact of the Greek picnic. Was there any, and what was it? Now, I am of the generation, I'm 37, and I am of the generation in which my cousin, particularly my cousin Joe, who went to NCA&T, and like as a young person, he's coming into town, right, for the Greek picnic, which is happening. The way I understood it, it was like there's a Fairmount Park version, and then there's like a South Street late night version. Oh, sorry, Leah, I'm trying to hurry up and get through it. But yeah, so the Greek picnic, to me, it represented what Black Greek organizations and that sort of social and quote unquote nightlife infrastructure that I am still looking for to this day. Of like, where there's the college parties, but there was like a whole like world of like the Black professional and Greek organizations that had an entire nightlife infrastructure, right? That was really like the reason why Black businesses could stay alive. Like those were that community, that cultural community really led these things on work. So like, yeah, the Greek picnic is a huge joint. Like you got the Platt, you know, which has this sort of like 80s and 90s, but then the Greek picnic through 90s, which is like pretty much our Freaknik. And we deserve a documentary as such. And obviously, as I mentioned, Freaknik and the Greek picnic, there's obviously probably a lot of, you know, sexism and misogyny and all sorts of probably incidents that are underneath those things that also deserve, you know, serious scrutiny. But it was a time.
yeah, and I think it's important to say that these are cultural institutions,
Right.
and cultural times that like are a sign of people coming together. But I wanted to transition to what is happening like from like at this moment around like Black monuments at the president's house down in Independence Hall. Just making a rough transition, but I just want to talk about it because it was just happening. There was a few people that were supporting it. I wonder if you could talk more about Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. Say what the monument is. Say what's happening with it.
Yeah, so the work of the Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, one of the leaders of that is Michael Cord, incredible, you know, radical lawyer here in the city of Philadelphia, and has been on the ground organizing for a very long time across many different spheres, whether it be criminal justice or cultural heritage work. And the Avenging the Ancestors Coalition at the time that there was new investments to be made at the Independence Hall, Old City, the sort of story of, you know, the birthplace of democracy in Philadelphia, as they like to say. They petitioned, led many different, you know, community events and direct actions to ensure that the story of the enslaved Africans who were enslaved by George Washington would be honored. And in this installation that would be called the President's House, which now is at 6th and Market. And it's in the news again, and organizing is happening again after the mandates through the National Park Service around the sort of, divisive histories, I think they're using that term, that it quote unquote represents, by being able to share the story of the enslaved African legacy under like that built these, quote unquote United States. Yeah, so there are events taking place. We're excited to talk about it more tomorrow and invite people to different actions and provide resources. The Avenging the Ancestors Coalition is there. The President's House in particular, I think, Sterling, you had looked up some resources around Ona Judge, right? And I know she's coming back. There's a children's book that came out not too long ago about her that did pretty well. But the story of Ona Judge as this fugitive, enslaved African woman. Are you good on that story? I don't know the specifics.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I can tell the story. I mean, I think one of the things about this, there's a, I don't know. I care about Philadelphia because people always want to they want to draw back to the Constitution. They want to talk about the Declaration of Independence. It's like all that stuff. Like when you live around here, we just live within it. These are just the places that we go, we pass by every day. But like lots of people talk about them, and then and they'll talk about George Washington, and luckily, thank God for the Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, we walked by the President's House with the people that were enslaved. But it's not just the people enslaved. Like they tell the stories of how Hercules was a great chef and was the person that had all these recipes that they kept from when they came across were the Middle Passage, etc. All that stuff. But they also talk about Ona Judge, who was a woman. She was one of, it was not even George Washington's slave, but Martha was part of Martha Custis. She had more slaves than him. She was richer, right? So she escaped. While you come to Philadelphia, the capital was in Philadelphia. She escaped because there was all these people here that had networks for her to go to, and then she escaped it to New Hampshire. Sometimes people want to talk about George Washington being a really great slave owner or something, but no, he had people go up there and said nah, it's I'm not going to give you credit or free you now because of what you did, and he never stopped from that, so she kind of heard that. She's trying to negotiate something with him, and they went into further hiding and said no, we can't go back there. For us to have the story of George Washington as a good man, when that somebody escaped from them, who do you escape from? And then not only did he just not let it go, he's give me back my property. And she was afraid to go wherever she goes. It's and somebody found her when she was just walking. It was a relative of Martha, that's how it was. Yeah. And just now, when it's I feel we make comparisons to now. It's no, you were just walking and somebody grabs you off the street and says, nah, we're going to take you back down to where you belong. And she was able, I don't even know how they escaped that, because it was felt like once you were found, but she did, and she married, and she had a good life. But it's just that story of the actual existing, what it was, and then the fact that there was resistance to the thing is extremely important. As I say all the time, people made their lives. They were able to, even amongst the fascism, it's sometimes when you talk to a lot of white people, they're really sad about the fascism, but it's we have always lived within fascism at a time when you might be grabbed off the street. I know I'm really interested in the history of the Black history, of, before the 1865, where you might be in Philadelphia and somebody might grab you off the street and send you back down south. That is just lived experience of Black free people.
I tell you, look, you talk about George Washington, a story that needs to be talked about more. So, in terms of, so there was a law on the books at the time that if in Pennsylvania, the enslaved folks were meant to be set free if they were here on quote unquote free land for more than 6 months. So what George Washington did, he instituted a process to ensure that at every time, like it would be like 4 or 5 months, they would go on a trip to take them across the border to reinstate and renew the 6-month clock of their, and this was a process that he held for years, right? So I agree with you, bro. There's a renewed narrative of the quote unquote George Washington. I don't know. Maybe we should get Lin-Manuel Miranda to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like for people that were just like born into a situation that they just had to deal with the slavery. They sure did a lot to like. There were so many rules that they had to get around to keep it going. That you're just like, nah. But I feel like that sort of stuff is really important to hear because like the particularities of the peculiar institution is what make it so vile. You know, is like that's when you're like, oh yeah. That's why it's so bad.
Can we get like on this note, talking about monuments also and thinking about like all that's sort of wrapped into them. I mean, one, there was a great comment in the chat of like people do get caught up often in these symbolic struggles, right? As opposed to like community, and I think that's an important note, right? But also behind these symbols, are various social forces within the city, right? And so I think a couple that are obviously been, garnered national attention over the last, 5+ years have been, the Frank Rizzo statue, and the legacy of Frank Rizzo in the city. Yeah. And then of course the Columbus statue and what cultural resonance that has with particular forces within the city. And maybe we could talk a little bit about those struggles and the meaning about them locally for different groups. Why don't we start with Rizzo?
Yeah, let's start with Rizzo, right? And I'll do my Chester thing again, right? Just as a quick reminder, because Chester was the industrial hub, right? And in particular, at the beginning of the 20th century, like Sun Shipbuilding, which goes on to become Sunoco, the Pew Fam, it's a huge space of employment, and it's also the city at the time is predominantly, dominated by Eastern Europeans, and the city of Chester becomes the sort of mechanism, particularly of Delaware County, Delco, which has a huge sort of like popular mainstream resonance as this sort of like hub of white working class activity, is where those Eastern European folks sort of earn the quote unquote wages of whiteness, and come into this struggle, right? So I say that to make a connection that like Eagles fans, when you see like the white, go ahead.
Oh, I also just would make the connection for people who watch these shows that like the HBO, like Mayor of Easttown, and then there's the new one, Task, right? Yeah. Like this is very much like what's going on within the white folks within these shows, or what an attempt to portray some version of it, right?
Yeah. So when you see like the white Eagles fan, right, the sort of like diehard, that's actually the symbol of that is like the Delco white working class sort of like man, the youths and all that. That is, the hoagie, that's some Chester stuff. You know what I'm saying? So I just need to put that out there first of all, and say like that legacy of the sort of like how, and for Rizzo, right, Italian, how Italians quote unquote become white. That pathway, right, has a particular history in Philadelphia's 20th century. And is the basis, right, of this sort of like hold and this struggle around this sort of like symbolism. So, and I love that somebody in the chat mentioned, right, like it's not just the Rizzo statue, it's also the Rocky statue, right? That these two things are in some ways synonymous of trying to hold on to this mythical history, which cements them as this sort of white, white coming into power, white coming into winning struggle. So yeah, South Philadelphia is like a huge space in which the defense of Frank Rizzo, this openly racist white the police commissioner, which becomes mayor, who sort of set the tone for quote unquote law and order politics. That like that legacy is rich, and it is always sort of like held and fought to be protected as like he was the one who ensured that blacks were quote unquote in their place for the white working class masses. And that's to go to Rocky statue, right? That's why you got a Rocky statue, but not a Joe Frazier statue, right? Who was the actual world champion. You know what I mean? Like, so there's that legacy that is used in the symbolism of that has constantly, since it's before it even was built, has come under, and the work of the MOVE organization, and the work of, Black radicals in general in this city has always fought against this illusion, like this propping up of Frank Rizzo, which is, directly connected to the sort of like the idea that Philadelphia is, this white blue collar city that needs to keep blacks in their place. But I tell you this, one of the things I've been on most recently has been like, in our community, in the Black community in Philadelphia, in the Philadelphia area, we probably need to also unearth that like he had some collaborators, many, and many folks who are willing to make deals, right? During the rise of Frank Rizzo or in the underlings that he represents, like there's a whole generation of politicians, right, who have made this commitment. And it's unfair because sometimes the story becomes in Black Philadelphia that like Frank Rizzo, he was just a huge scourge on Black Philadelphia and every Black person in Philadelphia hated him. And it's not true. It's not true. And it when we get more specific about it, we begin to understand the sort of like class contradictions and these ambitions and pursuits that keeps us locked in to a system that is actively working towards the disposal of all of us, while some people think they're getting ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to add that, Frank Rizzo actively went into gay and lesbian bars and arrested people and terrorized all the queer people in the city. He also, purposely wasn't building affordable housing or low-income housing, and certainly wasn't building it in South Philly. I mean, there had to be a whole lawsuit against that. The HUD, part of what the fights that we've done that we've talked about on here, have to do with the UC townhomes. I mean, one part of that is Frank Rizzo was only forced to build such a thing because of HUD threatened to not give Philadelphia any money if they didn't actually build the housing. So it's like, I would just say he's rhetorically bad, but of course there are so many things that he did that were against the Black community that we've got to state,
Yeah. I mean, I think another legacy that's important to talk about with Rizzo is, obviously more known to some degree in maybe the national public memory, but not very well articulated. So what you talked about in terms of, he leading raids on gay bars and stuff like that. He also becomes, he's also, a part of the force that is like super violently repressive to the Black Panther Party in Philadelphia. And then from there you get to 78, which is the lesser discussed but almost equally important, like, siege on the Move House. And that's actually the incident. People often don't really know this because they kind of conflate the two big moments, but that's actually the incident that leads to the Move 9 and to 9 folks being incarcerated for one alleged bullet, which, Move always stated that they didn't, that they didn't shoot the cop that day, that it was actually friendly fire that, shot one of the officers that day. But nonetheless, it's kind of an amazing case because you have 9 people incarcerated for one bullet, and all of them get given, like, I think a 30-year to life sentence, which most of them, I mean, they all served more than 30 years, except for a couple of them who actually passed away while they were still incarcerated. And fortunately, now they're all, the surviving members have all, been out, or, passed, I think, after they got out. But that has only happened in the last, like, 6 years or so. And so that history, everybody knows the story of 85 to some degree, and the Move bombing, which of course happens under Wilson Good's administration, which comes after Rizzo. But the whole, like, move up to that, the whole period up to that is really important historically, and Rizzo's like central to that. And that's the era also when he would talk about his police force as being, like, strong enough as being able to invade Cuba and take out Castro if the government would send him down there, and that kind of stuff. And so also a very, people have talked about this, but Trumpian, like proto-Trumpian figure, in terms of his rhetoric and the way that he talked about the kind of use of force. And well, there's the part that you're talking about, Chris, which I think is really interesting, the history of, like, kind of Black collaboration as well. It is also true that you will have, if you're on a protest or something like that and it's about police brutality, you will just have Black elders come up to you and tell you a story about, being screwed over by Rizzo's cops. Like, this is just, like, ubiquitous in the city as well. So I just wanted to add that.
And that's the interesting thing. So when I was doing my dissertation work, right, and some of those involved conversations with folks who were connected with the bars in Philadelphia, and as Sterling mentioned, right, there's a legacy here, right, of Rizzo using the police and to target specific communities through these bars, right? And the interesting thing about that, in terms of, like, I was trying to, as I'm talking with elders about this and thinking of, like, these collaborations, if you will, of, like, is it possible, right, that these are also subversively a means by which people are creating space for continued Black organizing? That was like you got to keep your enemies close, right? The idea that in some ways being in and creating some form of relationship with Rizzo is the thing that's going to keep the cops out of your bar every weekend. Like, that sort of patronage, system, if you will. Like, there's and I don't know. I don't know the truth of the story, right? But I do know that in order for folks to have those quote unquote degrees of freedom away from the constant and repression of the police, that somebody had, like, some sort of strategy needed to be imposed. And I think that's also interesting for where we are now, right? In terms of, like, what is our relationship to these city forces right now, right? I think it was an article in Enquirer earlier this week around Sherelle Parker and the relationship between the city and the sort of federal, the National Guard, and like the things that are happening in Chicago, and that were very, like, why is the city of Philadelphia not exactly targeted, right? Why haven't the troops been sent into Philadelphia as of now? And I think it's a really interesting and, like, strategy and like conversation of like what is our orientation to these sort of like state mechanisms, right? And recognizing the type of incredible, the violence and the weapon and all the tools that they have, right, at their disposal. How do we create the space to continue to build up the type of freedom and care institutions that we need? And does the most direct spaces of confrontation, does that only inflame and just create and sort of take us away from the ability to build those institutions? And what happens in that like liminal space, right, between like we know we are not trying to become this, and at the same time, if we are openly questioning, openly like shouting it down, does that only invite further repression? Right.
Well,
And I feel like that's a moment that we're in right now. Like, what do we do in this moment? I'm sorry.
there are different times though too. That was the time when white people were the majority of the city. I mean, demographics have changed. That's just the truth. Like the South Philly city council person used to was white for decades and decades. That changed with Kenyatta Johnson. Kenyatta Johnson is now, and it's like that one with the demographic change from the early '90s. It's like it was different. It was different, and I am finding it helpful to have more conversations though about like what is the strategy of how to survive these things, so that it's not just like a simple on let's take the Wikipedia entry on this thing and believe everything. No, no, you got to complicate it. So I mean, I appreciate the historic work on that too.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's always the question here, right? This is one of the contradictions, is that you build these institutions, right? And then there's also, you get into the politics of preserving the institutions as well, right? Which can also de-radicalize in certain moments. Like, I mean, in one way, you're talking about the de-radicalization as a preservation strategy to some degree of like, okay, like let's adjust our rhetoric. Like maybe we don't, I mean, the abolish the police thing, this and that. Like, does this put us at odds? Using the phrase anti-fascist right now, does this put us so in the crosshairs, right, that then we are actually putting a target on our back and we don't have the level of community support necessary to actually engage that pitched battle, like right now with the forces that are at array? And like that's a strategy conversation for people. On the flip side, there's also though like within those moments where more is possible, right? Like, does that orientation also become a break upon the kind of radical trajectory that you could have in those moments? And that's a complicated calculus and battle and discussion, right? Because a lot of times also we see how the institutions that we build, if they have nonprofit status, if they have some form of connection into legitimacy, they're also the ones that, as more radical politics are being pushed forward in moments where the people feel like, okay, this is the time, we're going into the streets, this is what we want to seize upon, those forces might have some of that language, but also are not really willing to go in certain places where a lot of other people are, right? And I think that's always just a complicated, like you said, it's very complicated, like that, those politics and those relationships.
Yeah, and the complications and the contradiction. I love the comment too of like PE and a deep dive. Like these are the questions that we are seeking to build in organizing community in Philadelphia to think with and strategize with through a project like the Du Bois Movement School or Abolition School, right? Like how do we get into the specificity, right, of the city, of this region, right, to talk about the opportunities that are there, not in a way that is, that is informed through an internationalist, understanding, but it's taken seriously the type of capacity building and stress testing work that we need to do in the city in order to emerge the type of like freedom forward institutions that are needed in this time, right? And across the many different spheres and communities, right, that are affected by this, multifaceted fascist attack. So, like, how do we get into the specificity of that work, right? And how do we recognize the infrastructure or the inheritance, right, that is present in our communities, right? Like the work that Sterling and Wiley do through the Philadelphia Housing Action work, right? And the type of network of housing and homes and the family and community that comes out. Like, these are opportunities for us to build like real infrastructure, enduring ones, right? Like not just the immediate action, but how are we caring for folks, right? And how are we allowing these lessons to reach new generations? Like that's the marathon work, right? That Abolition School is kind of like trying to advance the community to think about really deeply. And it's hard because like a lot of this is we say like illegitimate knowledge, you know what I'm saying, or treated as illegitimate knowledge, and you got to go about the work of recovering how things were done, right? Like you got to talk with Dr. Ahmed, right? You got to be in the spaces where the folks who were part of these historic, like we got to talk with Mumia, we got to listen, like we got to talk with the move work, like we have to build these spaces in which we are sharing the lessons of how folks built these enduring platforms for radical struggle, so that we can think, really intentionally and deeply about how we want to move forward in this moment. And knowing whatever move we do ain't going to be perfect and it's not going to be like a lasting resolution, but hopefully it allows us to be able to build up our capacities and recognize that our practice, as Ruthie, one of my good friends, Ruthie Gilmore, talks about, is like practice makes different, right? So what are we practicing? That was like an Abolition School plug.
Yeah.
No, right on. This is a good comment. So the community is suffering from a lack of grassroots shared leadership savvy enough to leverage political power. And I think, this connects with something I was talking with you about before we got on the air. Chris and Sterling and I have talked about this as well, which is just there is a disconnect. Like, I think there are a lot of progressive forces. There are people on the left in Philadelphia, but a lot of that activity tends to center around academic institutions. It tends to center in kind of what people would call University City, which is a rebrand of a portion of West Philadelphia, right? And there is a disconnect between that and a lot of the working classes of Philadelphia, particularly, Black working to middle class folks, I think, in the city, just from my perspective. And, I don't know if specifically that's what that comment is related to, but I think that there is an issue there that we have to figure out how do we bridge. And what are some of your thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, and I like the second comment from them as well. We need to go from conferences to caucuses, whereby we plan, strategize, and implement. Like, totally agree, right? Like, how do we form these strategic assemblies, right? Shout out to Kali Akuno, the work of Cooperation Jackson, and like the work that they did on how you form these people's assemblies, which is, even by their own words, like this unfinished project that they're involved in, right? So like, I think we are headed towards the same thing here in Philadelphia, right? Of thinking of like, how do we hold assembly? How do we, and Sterling, I would love to know your thoughts on this too, because we're coming up election season again, right? How do we not allow our idea of community power or grassroots leadership to just be reduced to the idea of holding elected official positions? What are the many different avenues in which we sort of build, sustain, and leverage community power? Like, these are very serious questions that deserve the space of community assemblies, right? But in order to, and this is, where the tough work comes in, the hard, messy, chaotic work relational work of maintaining people's assemblies, you know, where we are all navigating the underdevelopment of, you know, underdevelopment of our ability to be critical and principled thinkers, and at the same time dealing and navigating our own, you know, traumas, our own ways of like the things that have misshaped us, right? How do we do the healing work internally, right? Necessary to be able to come into a room together and hold space together to create this enduring platform. Like it's, I think that work is something that I study a lot, right? Like, what is the thing that held people together? You know, what is the thing that kept people in the room? Why were they willing to come back to the next meeting, even though the last one went totally left? You know what I mean? Like, what are those sense of connections? And I think the thing that I have understood coming from Chester is like, it's not my connection to the reason I'm going to homecoming tomorrow is not connected to no like direct articulated politic. It's connected to the fact like these were the people that I survived this space together through, right? And in many ways, they were the people that helped me to smile through it or helped me to find some sort of space of resolve. And some of them were the ones who were like not helpful at all. But at the same time, we got through it, you know? And in some way, like that ability to still come together, like, and I think about that, like what is the ways in which we're anchored together, right? And I don't think that you can just, you know, as we talked about a little bit, you can't just pull up Robin Kelly's Freedom Dreams and be like, hey y'all, this is what we doing. That's not enough. What is our connection to each other, and what is the thing that sustains us in relationship? And that's tough work.
Yeah,
you know.
I mean, I think I feel right there with you, and I do feel like maybe people are different than us as well. I do feel like it is part of our job to kind of give them the context of that too, and to tell the stories that, you know, in the way that they need to be told, which I would say that is based on truth, you know. So when you talk about, I was wondering about the kind of this push for Black history. I know African American history as a requirement, but also after 2020, they wanted to teach MOVE. They wanted to teach the truth about MOVE. You know, all the things that were good about it, but also just the truth. The fact that, you know, they were about self-determination and ecological consciousness and all those things too. So I don't know if you were involved with part of that. Were you, or
with which part? Say it one more time.
With teaching MOVE in
yes.
public
So
schools.
When I was at the Robeson House, I was able to support the beginning of the MOVE activist archive, you know, and we hosted it through the Robeson House, right, to be able to do the archival processing and work necessary to be able to, you know, platform this work. And that work is still ongoing. And we should lift up the Reclaim Osage campaign that Mike Africa Jr. is doing. There's a mortgage on 6221 Osage Avenue. The address by which, you know, the city of Philadelphia, you know, bombed. And as the book says, behind Jared, let it burn, right? There's Mike Africa is working on turning that house into this sacred space by which the continuation of the legacy of organizing continues, and in a way of telling a story that doesn't just focus on the incredible state terroristic violence, but also ways that lifts up the goals and the teachings of John Africa and the possibilities of what that sort of liberation movement represented. So like certainly like we are in a space of needing to continue to build and claim more spaces by which we can come together and convene and do this work of gathering.
Yeah.
I think it was like Fred Moten or something who talked about that during the civil rights movement. They're like, yo, you can think about it as like the civil rights movement, but what's actually happening is these like little, you know, small movements and gatherings and this commitment to continue to come together, right? And figure it out on like together, you know. And I think that in Philly, we certainly do need to get there and trying to figure out how do we create the type of like platform and infrastructure to do that. I think a good joint to start with is Haki Madabuti's from Plan the Planet, Third World Press, and the need for like building institutions. And you talk about the work that Haki and his partner Mama Safisha and the Institute of Positive Education has done in Chicago. Like the type of progressive Chicago that we see today is not possible without the history of Black self-determined institution building that happened in one way, right? In one way with Third World Press and the Institute of Positive Education and the schools and the Betty Shabazz School and those things, but also, you know, the Black Peastone Rangers, the Gangster Disciples, like the gangs are also part of this story of self-determination in Philadelphia. You can't write them out of it either. So like, how do you synthesize the wide range of Black self-determination organizing and the ways that we've built these avenues for collective power, right? To think about, you know, how those things are arranged in order to build and assemble or reassemble the emancipation circuit.
Yeah. I mean,
I just want to plug real quick. This is the book that one of the books that Robin D.G. Kelly talks about with Fred Moten in that discussion of how did the civil rights movement happen, right? Which is like Moten's question. And it's The Origins of the Civil Rights Movement by Alden Morris, Black Communities Organizing for Change. So just wanted to plug that. But yeah. Go ahead, Sterling.
I think we gotta have both. I feel like there is like a little putting down of this symbolic space, and I just think that we have to have both. I think it all matters. I think the symbol of a statue of Frank Rizzo, it needed to be torn down. I don't know if you can show the defacement picture, but it needed to be defaced. And so they're like, no, we reject that. I think that was really important. I think the same thing goes for the Columbus statue in terms of like what that has done on this, you know, on these continents, you know, this raising symbols to people and places that have done so much harm. It just matters.
Sorry.
So yeah, I just want to say, and I think that even a space like, you know, 6221 Osage and the Reclaim Osage campaign and figuring out, and when we say like, also being a little bit more specific about like what happened, it's like, well, it's the Moo family, it's like the people there, and then all the people that lived around there. It's like they get to tell the story of that, and reclaim it if they want that. And I'm supporting that is what people should do, and not just like use it to like sell T-shirts and get money off of it or mention it to seem cool, but like, you know, put some material basis behind it, because it'd be really symbolic if instead of that being the last memory, is like the last memory was someplace that never left and was a symbol of, you know, Black resilience, you know, and also just to show gratitude for undergoing that, and like being the people that stood in front of the house of the guns and defended. They weren't just defending, you know, the house, they're defending all Black people in the city against Rizzo during that time. I mean, that's what it was. Even people that didn't really know what was going on, it's like it was important that happened. And I guess that's what I think about. It's like for my family, I'm going to say we're just outside of it. I did not know any of this stuff before I started learning myself, and then I give it to people I knew, and we're just like, so I know in my family, you know, I'm like that's not what we grew up with, you know. We're not part of the Black radical tradition or whatever. I didn't go to the schools. That's not something we did. And it's like great to be here now and to be talking to people and learning from people. But also I want more people to be here. I want more people to have just been behind it, you know, to say like, yeah, I'm supporting this because they didn't drop that bomb somewhere else. They dropped it on, that was collective punishment, you know, and the same thing that you should see, you know, across the world, you know, from Gaza to Sudan to anywhere where that's happening. You know, we got to support us as a people. I know I went to, this is a short thing, but I went to Colombia and Medellin, and the similar things happened there. It's happened in this neighborhood in Medellin where they dropped a bomb. They just went house to house, dragged people out of their houses, looking for the troublesome people. And it's just like, it is not just happening here; it's happening across this earth. And the fact that you'll have something, and you'll be talking to people, and they're questioning it, and there isn't solidarity, is ridiculous. By this amount of time, it seems like we should get some solidarity, and you should know who's right and who's wrong. You should know who's on our side and who isn't. And honestly, it's not clear. Honestly, I mean, sometimes I will say with our mayor, I mean, maybe she's doing whatever she needs to do, but it's not really necessary to fire the DEI director. I don't even care about DEI, but this person who was doing some good work, doing some great work in the administration, and making sure that actually like resources were getting all around to like the Black, Latino, Asian neighborhoods, and making sure that like everybody that was working class in the city has some dignity. The person that actually cared about that was fired. And instead of like actually doing any of that stuff, they said, "Though we're Black, so that's good enough." That's what I hear. That's what happened. They're like, "Well, I'm here, so this is what's good enough." And instead of doing that, instead of like actually building the housing, they're taking the money from housing and they're putting it into a 600-person like treatment jail, mental health treatment jail. That's the sort of stuff that I see what's happening in Philadelphia. And I have to say that like that's not those. I'm not allied with those people, and maybe we're not those people in there. But the people that get grabbed off the street, put in the jail, and die screaming for their life, while like the people around them are like saying, "Help this person, help this person." Like that's all I can think about. Think about the screams of those people being grabbed off the street, not charged with anything, put in the jail for 72 hours, and they go withdraw and they die in their prison cell. And then everybody around them says, "Yeah, that person." They will tell you, the people, I trust the people that are incarcerated with them. On that, I don't trust any CO. I don't care if the mayor says it. I don't care if the Department of Health says it. All these people they're on cahoots to make sure that we die. Just like, and I won't even say like that. That's like the worst situation. But like, even from like in the hospitals, right? It's like D'Angelo just died when he was 51. All that stuff. It's like, know who is actually your enemy. We got to get really clear on that stuff. So, I don't know. That's all I got to say on that.
No, I love that, Sterling. I always appreciate your reminders of like the urgency of the work. And like, I'm someone who can, sometimes get lost in like, I got to do more reading. I want to do more study. I want to, but you always, remind me that like in the time that we sort of, are attempting or want to attempt to sort of like step back, there's always, folks who are being, fatal, like who are dealing with the fatal consequences of our inaction in those moments. And if we're not thinking about that, right, then we probably are entering or orient ourselves in this work wrong.
Yeah, and I will just say, like, at this moment, like, even as we talk about this, like, our mayor is attempting to brutalize people that are homeless, that are living on the pier, Walmart pier down in South Philly, instead of just allowing those people to be, or telling, the private owner that you have to do something, you cannot do anything until you make sure that people have some place to go. They are pushing them into the river and saying, "We don't give a fuck about you." And I just got to say that as like the timeline for that stuff happening. It's like, as soon as I get off this call, that's what's going to happen, right? So I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to you, but it's happening right now. So people have to know that.
People do. I agree. And I think the challenge is like, how do we recognize the urgency of these immediate moments and these immediate, campaigns and confrontations that must be done, while not in its connection to the long-term horizon. You know what I mean? Like, that is always is one of our most important and most difficult and complicated and sometimes impossible work. And the thing that, just like you talk about like the symbolism, and I pulled up this quote that I was looking at last night. Abdul Malik Simone does a lot of like urban ethnographies. And we share a friend between us, this book, Improvised Lives, right? And one of the things that he talks about is the Sun Ra. And I didn't think about Sun Ra in this way until he put it this way. And he comes up with this term that he names as districting. right? And he says, for Sun Ra, districting referred to an incessantly inventive practice of operating in the discontinuities between having a location in which one is identified and from which one can identify and speak to others, and a capacity to address others, to call upon them and implicate them beyond the specificity of any location. So as such, Egypt, right? And he summarized speaking about Egypt and Egyptology and or Kemet a lot, right? Did not hold anything in itself. It was not a promise ready to spring into any kind of revolutionary action, but more a device that could relay the knowledge Sun Ra said that blacks needed towards aspirations that continuously had to find mask, right? Mask under which to operate. And also away from the strict codifications that could be counted, or I think of like surveillance, right? The strict surveillance of these places, right? So for Sun Ra, it didn't matter that much if black people were missing from an inhabiting, or I would say advocating for the sort of American symbols. What was more important was that they went missing in action, right? Like the idea that we are constantly, and I think like the inventive practice of like, we are creating the symbols, right? And we are imbuing them with a sense of certain power, right? And I think people need to realize that the power is coming from the people. And I think sometimes we get caught up in realizing that like the statue is the destination, or the installation, or the plaque, or the thing is, it's no, it's our ability to come together and build a collective politic that says this is needed, and that is which is important. And the feeling of how do we continue to like manifest and build that energy and transfer it in multiple ways, where it's not just the statue. You know, I'm not, the way I say it is like the Tanner House is, it's 3D. You know what I'm saying? It's not just, it's a living, breathing thing. It's not just a statue that quote unquote cannot speak. It is activities that are going to be happening and continue to happen that are going to incubate other projects. So like, how do we recognize, yes, that the symbolism is important as a point of leverage, as a device by which that we can continue to utilize to organize ourselves towards these sort of like larger horizons, rather than getting caught up in worrying or whether the state of Pennsylvania or the United States is ever going to approve liberatory black historical education. I'm not fighting over that. I'm fighting over the knowledge that folks need to know about what liberatory black education is, to make sure that it reaches the next generation of folks who will have to inherit and continue to struggle.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's a great place to kind of wrap up our main remarks, and I'll go to some stuff from the chat, which some of it we don't need to comment on or whatever, but some of it we can as well. So yeah, Leah, I look forward to you catching the second half of the conversation after your meeting is over. Thanks for joining. Have we heard of the Afro-American Bicentennial Corporation?
Yes, very important, very important. This is the Forrest brothers in the mid 70s. This is the bicentennial, 1976. Just as Sterling mentioned, the importance of symbols and devices, the Henry Ossawa Tanner House does not become a National Historic Landmark until the DeForest brothers recognize the invisibility, the erasure of Black history from the quote unquote bicentennial. And they come together and organize, were able to find investment and support to be able to uplift a number of Black historical landmarks. And funny enough, the Henry Ossawa Tanner House is one of those landmarks that they help get acknowledgement. So very familiar with the Afro-American Bicentennial Corporation. You actually look up more work from Amber Wiley, that does the research on the work that the Afro-American Bicentennial Corporation does. And very important moment, and a way that they leverage this sort of like moment to support new Black institutions.
Yeah, and I think this is something too. I mean, next year will be the 250th, right? Anniversary of 1776, and there'll be a bunch of stuff around that. But I think that's something we should do an episode actually on the various movements related to the bicentennial, and kind of there's the dominant narrative and parades and all that kind of stuff. But then there was a lot of also ways that revolutionaries and radicals and community folks use that moment for other purposes and other organizing. And I think that's an episode in itself for sure.
Yeah, he can certainly get with me. SaveTheTannerHouse.org. info@SaveTheTannerHouse.org is the email. But if you go to SaveTheTannerHouse.org, you fill out the comment thing, it comes directly to my phone. So definitely would love to chat, and shout out to Vince DeForest, and would love to make a connection.
Right on. There used to be a huge Patti LaBelle mural at 34th and Mantua. Is it still there?
One might say it shouldn't be on 34th. Like, she's from South Philly. But I haven't been past. The last Patti LaBelle joint that I saw was if you driving down 52nd Street, I think it's like 52nd and Market, they got some faces of Black Philadelphia excellence installed on the sort of like pillars of the train station. Yeah, but we need more. We need more for Patti LaBelle. I'm being honest. You know what I mean?
George Washington was a land speculator, surveyed land that wasn't his and sold it to settlers who enacted the violence to steal the land. That wealth is what he used to become a slave owner. So yeah, the connections there between settler colonialism and slavery.
I'd say he's the Jared Kushner of 1776 or something. I don't know, 1760s.
Rocky seems to be more loved nationally than Joe, and he's a fictional character. That's sad. I think we're gonna have to do something actually related to Rocky and the politics of Rocky more in depth at some point as well, because yeah, the Rocky statue is a whole thing, but also there's the whole Muhammad Ali versus Frazier, and also there's a lot to dig into in terms of who Joe Frazier was, and the national racial politics also that kind of also Sonny Liston too. Just this, yeah, that's a whole thing too.
Yeah, and Joe Frazier is boxing gym right now. It's a struggle to kind of reclaim it as another sort of like space of Black Philadelphia heritage. It's a furniture store, or it has existed as a furniture store. It was owned, and there was a huge struggle to reclaim it. I think the owner wanted some astronomical price to get the building back, right? Because he recognized the sort of symbolism of it and tried to charge up for it. Talk about land speculation. And but that is out there, and you can look that up to read more about folks in the Frazier family that's been coming together to reclaim that boxing gym.
Also, recommendation for Mike Africa Jr.'s On a Move book. Great read, so informative. We'll have to try to get Mike Africa Jr. on the show at some point, and we could talk about Reclaim Osage, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that we could talk about with Mike. And then this question, in their opinion, the community tends to disconnect. This is like in the idea of assemblies and that, because the goals tend to be abstract, and I think that is an issue. It's a Western leftist issue sometimes too, of like these big horizons and ideas, but it doesn't really mean anything concretely for people that they can attach their minds and their hearts to, in a way that they're like, okay, I want to be involved with what you're doing because I can see the vision of what could actually be in a material sense in my neighborhood or whatever.
One of my favorite examples of that, I talk about in abolition schools, and we talk about primitive accumulation, right, as this ongoing practice. And Rosa Luxemburg is like the basis for that discussion. And of course, the PPA, Philadelphia Parking Authority, always comes up. And the idea of like the regulation of parking and fines and fees and this, that, and the third as this exploitative force on the people. And I say, yeah, like the struggle is we are like all like little row home blocks, with one side of the street that has parking, and folks got multiple cars and stuff like that. And the struggle is, can we organize ourselves to actually like self-govern parking on our block? If we are we are calling ourselves quote unquote aspiring revolutionaries, and we are trying to transform that whole system of government, like something as material and as meaningful as like, do we have enough relationships with the people that are on our street to be able to self-govern parking spots so that we do not have to give them, right, the permit parking system, and we don't give the block to the PPA to regulate and police, right? Are we willing ourselves to do that work of what it takes to do that? Because when you get into the specifics of that, that means like a group chat. That means like, you know, conversations that you need to have with probably people you don't even like. But the material work of that is the work of building the capacity for self-governance and sort of like sovereignty, right? That is the material work. So you can get caught up in the rhetoric of, you know, the revolution and this, that, and the third. But if you can't organize your own block, what are we even talking about right now?
Yeah, if you're still getting ticketed for parking in front of your house, then I mean, that's what's happening around here, around my neighborhood. So
yeah. And it reminds me, I mean, another person I would love to get on here soon is Gabriel Bryant. You know,
oh yes,
in the talk, because you know, just him. Also, another structure in Philadelphia that warrants, I think, you know, discussion is like the block captain structure, which is something also that people may not know about in other places, because it's not a structure that everybody has in every city in the United States. But it is also a space of like potential for block by block politics, right? And this kind of thing. You know, but yeah. All right.
And Crystal and Yane too. I mean, you gotta have I feel like the whole crew has been doing a lot of good work always.
Yeah, right on. Yeah. So anything else you want to say in closing, Chris? Reminders of upcoming stuff, things you got going on.
Tomorrow we start the Africana Studies Network and lecture series through Friends of the Tanner House. Everyone is invited.
It's in the chat, just so people. I mean, it's in the show description. So go to the links in the show description.
Abolition Journal, this project that is coming out of the Abolition School, this idea of like, how do we have a journal that is dedicated to uplifting the stories, reflections, questions, contradictions of our local radical movement ecosystem in Philadelphia, for us to be able to work through in a creative, you know, way that's not just telling people, quote unquote, what to do, but rather just like witnessing the sort of shared struggle that we're all involved in. Shout out to David Evans, who mentioned that the Docs Thrash building, which is another Black Heritage project that's in North Philadelphia. I want to say 23rd and Cecil B. Moore. That is also trying to reclaim like a Black creative space, and create like an intentional space, and then right down the street from us in North Philadelphia, right next to the Cecil B. Moore Library, which is also in need of support and revitalization. And there's a lot of organizing that's taking place through there. Shout out to the Brewery Sharswood Neighborhood Coalition. And yeah, man, just get on the ground, man. Get out there, get to know your folks.
The UNIA building is over there. Yeah, that's why I'm like, all of North Philly needs to be cut off from any future development. That whole place, you got historic place after historic place after person. You know, it's just, I love it.
Yeah, it's great stuff.
All right, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. This was a great episode. Thanks to the chat for showing up. Look forward. Please share it with folks. Like, share, subscribe. We will have more episodes of the Philly Portal coming soon. I know we'll do another one for sure next month, and maybe we'll get two in. I don't know. We'll see how ambitious we get. But yeah, appreciate Chris. This was great.
Oh, I should say before we leave, I apologize if I got any of the history wrong. I know how y'all do in Philadelphia. You can talk to me. I will apologize, and I will try to get it right next time. So if I messed up a name or a street or a year, I know y'all gonna remind me, and I appreciate that. And I'm very open to those conversations. You can meet me at Hakeem's bookstore, and we can talk about them.
Absolutely. He will be there. you.